President Obama's first visit to the Bay Area since his re-election wasn't without controversy. Republicans accused him of coming to billionaire Ro, and protesters demonstrated against the proposed Keystone XL oil pipeline, which would carry tar sands oil from Canada to the Texas Gulf Coast. Now, Carl Marinucci, I know you were at some of those events.
That's right.
What was the purpose of the president's trip here, and what came out of it?
The purpose was money. This was the president's first trip since the re-election, the San Francisco Bay Area, the ATM, and he was doing a very big favor to Nancy Pelosi, coming in to San Francisco, picking up $3.25 million in two events in one night.
Not bad.
Pelosi wants to win back 17 seats, and President Obama told both these groups, boy, we want to have Nancy Pelosi back as Speaker of the House. I know you've got an agenda for me, climate change, gun control, immigration, but, you want me to do all that? Give Nancy her seat back. And these Democrats came up with a lot of money. They paid, in some cases, $32,400 to sit down and dine with the president. He's always a star, but he also got a lot of pressure from the left. As you said, this Keystone XL pipeline is a very big deal to environmentalists in the Bay Area, and one of them, Tom Steyer, is a billionaire. At his home, Obama visited first. We know they talked about the environment because the president said so, and I interviewed Tom Steyer this week, and he said, yeah, climate change is the issue of our time. But I don't know if he pressed the president on it.
And Tom Steyer is a billionaire environmental activist. He's been very active on the Keystone oil pipeline issue.
That's right. And, this is important to environmentalists. They all say that this is one of the top things that President Obama promised for his re-election, that is, climate change will be #1 on my agenda or close to it. And they mean to hold him to it. And I think Tom Steyer does, too. Tom Steyer is interesting because he's being talked about already as somebody who might run for governor in California. He's already put $37 million of his own money into 2 ballot measures here, environmental ballot measures. So this is a guy to watch, and Obama came right to his home, perched on Sea Cliff overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. Then he went to the Getty home. It's kind of interesting, a climate change, anti-fossil fuel guy, and then he goes to Getty, as in Getty Oil. But hey, that's what you have to do in politics.
Well, and not only that, I mean, he's at all these beautiful mansions. So, of course, Republicans seized on that and slammed his visit as a visit to billionaires Row, said it was the definition of hypocrisy. Was their criticism effective?
Well, look, I mean, when you talk about any kind of either presidential candidate, the Republicans can hardly say they don't go to billionaires Row either. When it comes to politics, it's location, location.
Is this. Obama ran as this populist guy. He was going to change things. He was going to be, people's person, all that stuff. Rarely, when he comes to California and many other places, did he ever go out and actually talk to the people. And I think that starts to grate on people after all, because it seems like all of this is just a big money game. And does he get that people don't like that?
Tom, you're absolutely right, because I think the Bay Area, more than any other location in the country, Obama just comes here for money. When was the last time we saw him do a public event here? I can't even remember, frankly.
You think about it this past week, I mean, it's a perfect example. Basically, for San Franciscans, when Obama visits, it basically just means a traffic jam. You get the barricades going up on the sidewalks, you have to reroute yourself. Yeah. It would be nice if he actually came out and addressed people in this Bay Area. By and large, this area voted for him. On some of
the issues you're talking about,
gun
control, immigration, and so forth. I mean, it was interesting. We should know there were 1,000 demonstrators of the Keystone pipeline out in front of the Getty House from many different environmental groups. But the president, I got to ride in that motorcade, and it goes by these protesters pretty fast. It's not like he really gets to see them a lot. They did get a lot of press. It is an important issue, and we're coming up to, Obama's being pressured. He's really in a vice on this one. He has to decide, and he is the guy that will decide, and he's between labor that wants this pipeline and environmentalists who don't, and many of them are right here in the Bay Area. They're going to be pressuring him going to the side of the pipeline. You've covered this.
He was standing there, in front of the crowd with one of those people who is pressuring him, with Tom Steyer.
Right.
What did he say on Keystone? What did the president say?
It was really interesting. He was really trying to walk this fine line, saying...
He didn't say much about it.
Yeah, he never mentioned the K word, Keystone, never at either of these events. But he did say, I understand climate change is important to you. I get it. but the politics are very tough. So that's why you need to elect, give Nancy Pelosi her speakership back.
We could talk so much more about that, but there's also, let's move to the South Bay. There's also a race heating up in the South Bay. Congressman Mike Honda is now getting possibly some serious heat from a newcomer.
Yeah, and Honda was at these events, by the way, making sure that people knew Obama has endorsed him. This race in the South Bay, the Congressional District 17 in Silicon Valley, is potentially a battle royale that's going to be watched around the country. Why? Because it's young tech versus old traditional Democrat, labor versus Silicon Valley, and an Indian American, Ro Khanna, who's 36, which is a group with tremendous rising clout in Silicon Valley, against Mike Honda, who's a Japanese American and very popular with the API community, Asian Pacific Islanders. Honda has labor, they're all with him. He's a very traditional Democrat. He's got the whole Democratic establishment. But then you've got Ro Khanna, who's a Democrat,
worked for the Obama administration, knows
a big trade
how
rep.
to do a social campaign.
That's right. A very sharp guy who's already hired a lot of the Obama campaign, presidential campaign stars, and has already amassed $1.2 million from some of the stars of Silicon Valley. So this is all about Silicon Valley, all about the future, and we're going to see this real interesting, I think, knockdown, drag-out fight, frankly, between two Democrats in the Silicon Valley.
That's going to be a good one to watch. Carla, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, the Bay Bridge continues to make news this week. A state board has moved one step closer to suspending or revoking the license of the pilot of that oil tanker that sideswiped the Bay Bridge in January. And 3 weeks after steel bolts snapped on the new eastern span, still no clear answers on the cause, solution, or cost of repairs. Tom Baker, let's discuss first of all the tanker pilot. What did the state board do in his case?
Basically, they're pushing forward the idea of either suspending or revoking his license. It's not a done deal in any way, shape, or form. And even if it becomes a done deal, he will still have an opportunity to go in front of an administrative law judge who has the power to reject anything that the board might or might not do. So this is still very much a work in progress. But basically what they said was, here was a guy who understood that he was in a marginalized situation. He was complacent about being in a marginalized situation. He did not communicate well with his crew that were responding to his orders and all of that. And in his defense, the beacon that he probably would have gone out, which is to say the wider area on the bridge, that beacon was out. So they went to a less wide area, closer to YBI, and the currents are tricky there. I've been out there several times looking at the damage that was done and looking at the ship when it was out there. So they hit the bridge. And so the bottom line of this is that it is still very much a work in progress, but this guy does have some other dings against his license, 2 of which were his fault. A third one was not.
And he actually lost his license once in one of those incidents.
Yeah, so I think that, he's looking at a very bad situation, but I don't think it's hopeless for him. But I think what you're seeing is a change in the way we're dealing with this, because you asked earlier, what about, changes in the law? They've doubled the minimum distance from a 1/4 mile to a 1/2 mile. If you're going to even operate on the bay, trying to get out of the bay, if you don't have a 1/2 mile visibility, don't even think about asking. And then once you get underway, you have to call the vessel traffic service on your radio, tell them where you are, and you have to take guidance and all that. These are all new rules in the wake of what happened.
How rare is it for a bar pilot to have his license suspended or revoked?
Well, I think it's rare, but it's not unheard of. And many of these things that happen are things we don't hear about. Like, for example, he hit a dock down in Stockton, did some damage to the dock, and he had some problems there. But it's not a very common thing. These are very professional people. They are enormously skilled. They have enormous captaincy experience and all of that stuff. So this is not somebody who just happened to get the job. These are really some of the best.
The potential for damage and injury are huge when you're talking about the Bay Bridge, and we've seen it now a couple of times.
I talked to an engineer who told me, he said, in 2 cases, these things glanced off a bumper and you see the damage they did. He said, if those things would have hit head on, especially the Costco Busan, you would have had severe damage to the bridge.
Speaking of damage to the bridge, let's make sure we talk about those bolts that snapped. Now, has Caltrans made any progress in determining what caused it, and what's the solution, and how much is it going to cost?
The latest I can tell you is that next week they're supposed to release the test results on the bolts that failed. So we will see that. And in about a week after that, we are going to see what is a proposed fix. And the leading candidate for a proposed fix right now is putting a collar system around where these bolts went up to hold the thing in the same place. Now, there was some talk that maybe the bolts that have yet to be tightened down that can be removed and maybe replaced with new bolts, but that is still very much a work in progress. As to the cost was initially determined to be $1 million. And
Really?
I talked to a number of engineers, and these are people that won't necessarily speak publicly because they don't want to lose business with Caltrans, because there aren't that many bridges to be built and not many places like Caltrans.
What do they think of the $1 million number? Sounds low.
I think it's utter nonsense. And think about this. You have to have a design team redesign this whole new one-of-a-kind thing. Secondly, you have to then put it in front of a peer group, some of which are going to want to be paid for their peer group review, and you're going to have to do that. Then what you're going to have to do is do some design testing on a computer. Then you're going to have to fabricate this thing and do some testing of the final thing, and then you're going to have to mount it on the bridge. Now, if that sounds like $1 million to you, then I do have some property just in the north part of the bay you'd be very interested in.
And real quickly, I know you've been watching the case of the Richmond refinery, the Chevron refinery. Late breaking news today on that?
Late breaking news, the Cal OSHA people decided that they have done all the repairs that they need to do to start operations, and while many things are under appeal and many things was yet to be done, they feel that the refinery is safe enough to start operations any time now. Chevron says that it will do it within the next few weeks or days. And a lot of environmentalists and a lot of community groups say it's nonsense. This thing is riddled with corrosion and shouldn't open at all.
And I know you're going to keep on watching that, Tom.
Oh,
thank you. Well, Palo Alto-based Tesla Motors is in high gear this week, announcing it's profitable for the first time in the company's 10-year history. Then came a second announcement, a financing program for leasing. David, how significant are these developments for Tesla and also for the Bay Area as a whole?
I'd say the first is very significant, the second one not quite as much. Tesla is going out sort of on a limb here. They didn't release full financial results for the quarter. They'll do that a little bit later. But they came out right after the quarter closed and said, okay, we finally made a profit by any way that you measure it. They are 10 years old, and a lot of people have been saying, well, when are they going to get to profitability? It's one thing to get to profitability if you're a 10-year-old, software maker. If you're starting up a car company and basically reassembling a factory that had been taken apart, it's a lot harder to get there. So this is a pretty huge milestone. The financing thing, they were kind of hoping to ride a little wave of publicity with that, and they'd really hyped it up. It was this big super secret mystery announcement that they were going to make. And basically, they underwhelmed a lot of people as soon as they made it. The company's stock set records on Monday and Tuesday after they announced the profit. And then if you watched the after-hour trading after they made their leasing announcement on Tuesday, just started drifting downward.
So, I mean, David, Tesla's been a political football. As you know, the Republicans love to compare it to Solyndra, and they still do. Is that fair? It is a company that did get government assistance. Is it fair? And is it out of the woods? I mean, it's obviously still not a loser. It's not a Solyndra.
No, it's not a Solyndra.
Yeah.
It's not a Solyndra, but it's, in terms of whether it's out of the woods, you would want to see several years of solid profitability before you could say something like that. Still, they've gotten much, much farther than a lot of people thought they would. And, there is a comparison you can make here, because there is another California car company that got the same kind of loan that Tesla did. Not as big, but a similar kind of loan. And they announced this morning
Are you talking about Fisker?
Fisker Automotive down in Orange County. This morning they laid off almost their entire staff, cut it down to about 40 people. They've reportedly brought in a company that's a law firm that specializes in bankruptcy proceedings. They've been trying to get a couple of Chinese companies interested in buying them out. They haven't been able to make a car so far this year because their battery supplier declared bankruptcy. They even had 300 finished cars that were on the dock in New Jersey that had just been brought over from their factory in Finland, got wiped out by Hurricane Sandy. So pretty much everything for them has gone wrong. You look at them and they're in a serious world of hurt right now. And you look at Tesla, looks like Tesla is going to survive.
But the big difference seems to be for Tesla, and really for established electric car companies, and I'm talking specifically about Nissan with its Leaf and some other things, there's finally a real market for these cars. People are actually willing to spend $60,000, $70,000 for a Model S. People are actually willing to spend $30,000, $40,000 for some of these smaller cars in enough numbers that it now begins to make sense, which wasn't true when we were talking about who killed the electric car. There was really no market there. You had a bunch of expensive test models out there.
It's not a huge market, but there is a market. It's a weird market, though, because, I mean, you mentioned the Leaf and the Volt. Tesla actually sold more cars in the first quarter of this year than GM sold of the Volt or Nissan sold of the Leaf, which is kind of bizarre when you consider how much more expensive the Tesla is. Tesla even this past weekend announced that they would stop, or they would not make the cheapest version of their Model S car that they had planned to make, one that was going to be about $60,000. And they decided not to do it because only 4% of the people placing orders for the Model S actually wanted the cheap one. They wanted the more expensive one. So
Well,
it's a strange
a lot
market.
of them in Silicon Valley, that's
Oh
for
no,
sure.
they have turned into the Northern California status symbol of choice. But it's a weird market to try to figure out, you know?
So there may be a turnaround. And just real quickly, do you think that financing option they have will make a difference?
Actually, no, I don't.
Okay.
You still would have to pay a lot month by month. Some of the people who might be on the fence might go for it, but it's still going to appeal to high-wage people.
But also that's why Wall Street wasn't very happy. David, thanks.